What is going on, guys? Verkdevoden here, and today we're going to talk about a little lawsuit that I feel slipped under the cover of darkness over the holidays. So before we get into this video today, I'm going to say for the record that I am not a lawyer. I have not passed the bar, but I am pretty sure that I know more than any lawyer on planet Earth about this situation. So you should just watch this video because I'm the smartest YouTuber and no one can say otherwise. So let's start off with the first thing that I was actually really excited for Microsoft to acquire Activision, not because it creates an even larger sense of a monopoly in the gaming field, but because of what Phil Spencer has done in terms of creating a better internal ecosystem, I guess, for the developers that have been acquired so far. And I just see that being a good thing primarily for the employees. And even though I'm in America and we claim to be anti monopoly and pro competition, that's not really the case anymore. Not that it ever really was. Otherwise, we wouldn't need these anti monopoly laws and the FTC to begin with, but we do. But in America, for those overseas, if you don't already know this, basically, if you have enough money in America, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't, you're not actually held accountable for anything unless you literally get caught murdering someone or you defraud someone. And ironically, you probably get more time in jail for defrauding people than murdering someone. Really messed up, but that's just the way America works. So in this acquisition, Microsoft seeking to acquire Activision doesn't just affect the American market. I know there's a lot of Americans out there, especially gamers, who think the American market is the only one that matters, even though like South America, China, Europe are all growing at an exponential rate that is much faster than America is right now. But we're just going to go ahead and ignore that because Team America. Um, and so the FTC is not the only governing body, obviously, looking at this. If you've kept up on this story at all, the EU has their own, uh, I would say, regulatory body. I don't know if it's technically, I guess it's technically anti monopoly. I don't know if they use that phrase specifically. But this is interesting because I've been trying to keep up with this, and the FTC had talked about this and alluded to a possible suit blocking the acquisition, but they didn't actually go through with it until December 8th. And I feel like with all the holidays and everything kind of coming up and leading up to them, I completely missed this. And from YouTubers that I've seen that kind of follow this, also didn't seem to comment on it. I feel like this flew under the radar. Maybe it's just the algorithm that I'm stuck in on social media. But let's go ahead and go through this a little bit because I learned something today that was an interesting tidbit that I want to go into that may have changed my mind concerning the acquisition, but we'll see. So the Federal Trade Commission is seeking to block the technology giant Microsoft Corp from acquiring leading video game developer Activision Blizzard and its blockbuster gaming franchises such as Call of Duty, alleging that the $69 billion deal, or I'm sorry, alleging that the $69 deal, sorry, this is a weird run-on sentence, Microsoft's largest ever and largest ever in the video game industry, that seems like a superfluous sentence, would enable Microsoft to suppress competitors to its Xbox gaming consoles and its rapidly growing subscription content and cloud gaming businesses. So this is an argument not only put forward by FTC, but also the head of Sony. Because let's face it, we really are in a situation where there's just Sony and Microsoft. They're the two biggest, franchises. Like, if you want to argue Nintendo, go ahead, but they're kind of like the cute little brother who thinks that they're bigger than they really are. And for whatever reason, as you know, they kind of have their own niche and they kind of stick with it and don't really let anything out or allow anybody really in. So, in a complaint today, the FTC pointed to Microsoft's record acquiring and using valuable gaming content to suppress competition from rival consoles. Now, I say that, and you're like, well, duh, that's been happening in the industry for the last like 30 years. What's the deal now? And I agree. Like, what's the big fucking deal? This has literally been happening. Like, this goes back to like EA being the Death Star in the gaming industry back in the 2000s. You know, eating everybody up and then basically chopping up what didn't, you know, reap the benefits of the acquisition right away. Um, so it goes on to say that I suppress competition from rival consoles, including acquisition of ZeniMax, parent company of Bethesda Softworks, a well-known game developer. I feel like they had to make this report for people who know absolutely nothing about gaming. Microsoft decided to make several of Bethesda's titles, including Starfield and Redfall, Microsoft exclusives, despite assurances it had given to the European antitrust authorities that it had no incentive to withhold games from rival consoles. This is the key piece that kind of struck me like, wait, what? Did they say that? Because I never heard them say that. And that's definitely not what they would do with Call of Duty. Like, this is just kind of like a bullshit line that I'm like, if you believe that, it's almost like cryptocurrency. Like, if you believe the hype on this, you deserve to get defrauded. And so what I did is I actually pulled up the complaint, and to go through here, this is the actual legal complaint. You can read this online. But this is the interesting part is that, let's see if I can get to it here. Guys, adoption video game. So basically what this is talking about is that now both Sony and Microsoft do this, but what they're talking about is the vertical allocation of basically saying like the only way to get onto these high-end consoles is to either sign a deal with Sony or Microsoft, and it's basically complaining that it is decreasing the competition of smaller studios that we had like back in the day, like Midway for Mortal Kombat or Interplay. Honestly, those are the only two that I can think of off the top of my head, honestly, because most of them get bought up, right? So if you make a video game and you're an independent studio, usually you get bought up within the first year or two after coming out with like a new IP that kind of hit the ground running. And in the last 2 years, well, probably like 2 to 5 years, we've seen an acceleration of this, right? Of both Microsoft and Sony looking to buy up everybody under the sun, and not even just gaming companies, but technology companies that develop for gaming and future like virtual reality technology, things like that. So basically what they're saying is that you've got these two tornadoes sucking up everything and they want to put a stop to it. And the question for me is really about why stop now? You haven't done anything up to this point. Like, what's the big deal? And here's the thing that the FTC followed through is that it is true that Microsoft actually did tell the EU, and I think it's right under here. Yep. So Microsoft assured European Commission, the EC, that's the word I was looking for, during its antitrust review of ZeniMax purchase that Microsoft would not have the incentive to withhold ZeniMax titles from rival consoles. Like, I'm sorry, but who is dumb enough to believe that? Like, apparently quite a few people like swallowed that because that purchase, that acquisition was approved across the board in the EU, North America. I don't know how it works in China, but I mean, like, it went through without a hitch, right? But shortly after the shortly after the EC cleared the transaction, Microsoft made its public decision to make several of the newly acquired ZeniMax titles, including Starfield, Redfall, and Elder Scrolls 6, Microsoft exclusives. Again, fucking duh. Like, I'm sorry. It's just, I don't mean to be degrading to these people who are probably really smart. Well, maybe, But they sit on these boards that have to sit there and look at how these acquisitions are going to affect not only micro economies but macro economies. Now, if you're not really up to date kind of on what that means, so let's say a micro economy. So let's say you live in a small town and you've got two hardware stores that are owned by local owners, people who grew up and live there. You've got a flower shop, you've got two different grocery stores that are owned locally, you've got maybe I don't know, like an all around sort of go to store where you can get everything. So you've got this kind of micro economy of people who have lived there, who have built up their small businesses and whatnot. And then a Walmart comes in and basically says, hey, we're going to open up a Walmart. And the regulatory commission comes in and goes like, well, if you open up a Walmart within the towns, all of these other businesses are going under. And those jobs will basically be forced to either move, early retirement, or go work for Walmart. And Walmart's like, I don't give a shit what you say. So instead of putting in the town, they'll put it literally like 1 foot outside of the town's zoning capabilities or zoning jurisdiction, and it'll put them under. And what politicians will do be like, oh, Walmart's doing great because they brought more jobs. And I'm like, well, no, they didn't. From a macro side, right? If you just look at the total gross revenue, they can say like, oh yeah, they saved people so-and-so whatever money, and they brought in, let's say, I don't know what a Walmart is, 50 jobs. I don't shop at Walmart. I don't know how big they are. I don't know how that works. But let's say they brought in, like, they made 50 jobs, but they put out like 50 local people at a better paying job that way you're going to pay at Walmart, right? And so that's kind of looking at the anti-monopoly, or what people call like, oh, you're just anti-big business. And it's like, well, there's a reason for that. There's a reason we have an FTC. There's a reason we have what's the word I'm looking for? Anti-monopoly laws in general. And there's a reason that we have these districting, and we have not only local but national councils looking at this to kind of say like, okay, like, we do want to promote competition, because competition does what's the word I'm looking for? Inspire innovation, right? And what's been happening since, well, pretty much since the 80s, since Reagan started with this whole like trickle down voodoo economics with deregulation of the transportation industry, that the only thing that trickled down was the deregulation part that spread into all these other industries. And then at that time is when, Microsoft and Apple kind of started exploding in a market that wasn't there before. So instead of trying to regulate that, for the most part, they basically took a government, at least in America, took a very hands-off approach. And so the anti-regulation people are saying like, oh, look at where they are now. That, I remember when it was like the biggest story in the news when Apple became the first company to gross more profit than the American government. That had never happened in history before. And because of deregulation, because of the lower tax rates, and the restructuring of the tax brackets in America, it just, for companies, it just kept going down and down and down over the last 45 years. They were able to make more and more money and basically squeeze out any other competition. Now they'll tell you, just like, when it comes to like Facebook, like, oh, that's not our intention. Our intention is to inspire. No, their intention is to create a monopoly, to find a market, corner it, buy everybody out, and just lie to you, right, about being a monopoly. But that's like the norm, right? Like we are living in the first stages of Cyberpunk 2077. I forgot who the author was. But he wrote this back in the 80s when he created the tabletop game Cyberpunk 2077, where he basically said like, okay, if capitalism keeps going the way it is, and he saw this in the 80s, what is the end point going to look like? And that's how he created Cyberpunk 2077. And we are in the beginning stage of that, where basically governments from a financial and almost from a regulatory side are becoming moot, right? It doesn't really matter, because if you have more money than the government, you can pay off officials, you can do in stock market, all those sort of things. So anyway, let me kind of run into this, and I'll start to conspiracy theory the dots in my head to kind of well, not necessarily validate, but kind of give some credence to this that I'm telling you. And remember, I'm smarter than any other lawyer, so keep watching. So anyway, the EU from a micro and macro side is much more invested in competition because as much as we like to think that Europe is as large as America because no one produces a map that actually scales properly, I think you can fit like something like 4 or 5 Europes into America. And unlike the United States, where you can go from one state to the other without any sort of issue, we all use the same currency, we all primarily speak the same language. I mean, I've been to places in the South and Midwest where I'm like, what the fuck? But you get it, right? They're not speaking French, they're not speaking German, they're not speaking Norwegian. Like it's a very different thing, and they are much more protective of their populace than we are in America. Like basically, America is this neoliberal wet dream of hyper individualism, where it just really took root again from the late 70s leading into the 80s. It kind of took root in Europe, but it more took root in kind of the conservative party, and it didn't really trickle down the way that deregulation did in America. And so they are much more protective of like their healthcare, their citizens in general, with healthcare system, school system, whatever it is. They want to protect the jobs and the ability for people in Europe to get good jobs that are well paying, that are funded, that are, that pay their fair share of taxes. And they don't want these giant conglomerates becoming these massive monopolies. And so, as much as you can basically lie to someone's face and buy out whatever option you want to in America, I'm guessing this FTC, because this is primarily American based, is looking at how the EU is going into their second stage of investigation, which just got prolonged. They're looking at February as possibly the initial findings, and whether or not what I'm guessing is they're going to put a proposal forward and be like, you basically have to legally commit to the things that you said because you've lied to us in the past. And I think because of that lie, the FTC is basically not taking such a hands-off approach. And I know that I've seen a lot of comments and reaction videos to this where they're like, oh, this is just big government coming in and you're wanting to, I don't know, suppress something for political. I don't know how this gets you political gain. That doesn't make any sense to me. But it's one of those things where, oh God, it's just, I don't want to go off on like a tangent for like, well, I might as well. I've already, this whole thing is a tangent. I might as well just go on with it. So there are people that are very tribalistic on both the left and the right in America. Surprise, surprise, if you didn't know that already. And they go onto like Twitter and social media stuff, and they just write these just unbelievably ignorant statements. And they target politicians, I think primarily on the left, that actually are supportive of this. The left in America tends to be more anti-monopoly. It's more lip service than anything because there's not a majority of the left in Congress right now that will actually get up and do anything. It's unfortunately kind of a minority. And so this is where the money and the investments and everything kind of comes in. And here comes the conspiracy theory that I was talking about, is that when you have these companies that are already massive, like Activision, right? Activision is, owned by a bunch of different companies. But let me see here. Hold on a second. I'm going to forget the name. That's it. Berkshire Hathaway has the largest share of Activision right now, and it's only 7.69%, but the shares owned are 60 million. This company is, with this acquisition, if it goes through, which I'm sure it is, I think they're just going to have like certain conditions left on it. Berkshire Hathaway is an investment shareholder company that primarily works in insurance. You know who the owner is? Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is arguably the smartest investor of our lifetime, if not in history up to this point, right? This guy understands the market like nobody else. And this is why he is continually, even in his advanced age, he's got to be like in his 70s or early 80s. This dude doesn't stop. Like, this is like his addiction is to making money. And he understands the market and market trends better than anyone I can think of off the top of my head. And so, what I'm guessing, and this is again conspiracy theory, but Warren Buffett has a lot of friends in America, in America's Congress on both sides. Like, he doesn't really, if you're rich, you don't really take sides for the most part. You kind of hedge your bets. And that's why you see companies like Disney or MGM or Nike, they make campaign donations to every politician, even the ones that are like the mega fucking fascist, theocratic, monarchy loving, fucking treasonous pieces of shit, right? Like, it doesn't matter to a company. A company does not give a shit about the politics of the countries that it makes money off of, right? Apple, Microsoft don't give a shit that China is an oppressive communist tyranny, right? They don't care. They just want to be able to do business there, right? They don't actually give a shit that they're, uh, like right now they're basically, I'm going to say that Uyghur, I'm going to say that there's a Muslim minority group that basically was in camp somewhere, executed, like a re-education camp, like just all these crimes against humanity, right? It's been going on time immemorial. They don't care, right? After the floodgates of global economy came in, because China is looking and is going to be like the next big economy for making money, no one's going to sit there and say anything about China, right? This is why all the companies are basically in it. This is why, Trump's supposed tariff war failed miserably. And it's not going to happen. They don't care. And so they're going to buy off who they can. And I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, Warren Buffett's the only, like, anybody does this, right? Anybody who is rich enough to have holdings in multiple companies, they're always going to look to increase their bottom line profit. And I really do believe that this is what's going to end up happening. Anyway, the whole roundabout to this, and you can read the whole legal suit. Obviously, there are some things that you're not going to be able to see because this is like trade secrets. This is information that, what's the word I want to look for? I don't remember. I can't think of it right now. When a company produces something that is, their own, and it's and like integral to how their thing works, proprietary, I think might be the word I'm looking for, but I don't know why it feels weird falling off my tongue. But I'm guessing this is a lot of it here. But and you can see here, it'll talk about the relevant markets, the impact of it, and whatnot. It even goes on to name kind of, well, not really name, but goes into the price point and how it'll basically stifle anyone else. When Sony came out with the original PlayStation, there was the 3DO, there was the Neo Geo. Neo Geo is a little bit older. There was the Atari Jaguar. There were like a lot. There were more than just three systems out there. But again, what happens is that the dominant ones, usually like one or two, kind of claw their way out and end up putting the rest out of business and buying them up. And then basically, I don't know who owns the Atari trademark now. It might be Microsoft. I don't know. But Atari doesn't own Atari anymore, right? So I don't think we're going to see another explosion in the home console market the way we did in the 90s and early 2000s. I think that that's one of those things it's a war that's over, and barring any new proprietary technology that just blows the competition out of the way, um, I just don't see it going anywhere. And so I really think that this is kind of like a moot point, but reading this definitely changed my mind about supporting the Microsoft acquisition. But at the same time, I'm like, Sony's gonna try and do the same thing. So a lot of things they talk about is like what's being monopolistic and anti competition is, you know, console exclusivity, um, like what Sony did with Call of Duty for years, which basically is like, oh, people on Xbox can't access the DLC for like 1 year after it's released. And I'm like all shit that we know that has been going on, and no one said anything about it. So I think it really just comes down to is that these exclusivity deals were kind of a gray area in which these regulatory commissions were kind of like, we may not like it, but there's no technical law against it. We can't really hold you to anything. So we're not really going to do anything. But once the company started buying up these studios, I think that's where everyone kind of went like, oh, maybe we should do something. And then again, I didn't know this, having Microsoft basically lied to them. And then within I think it's like within a couple of weeks of clearing the deal, go, oh yeah, by the way, fuck you, we're making it exclusive. Okay, that seems really shitty, and it's one of those things where while I agree with it, I just don't know what are they gonna do going forward. Like, if they don't do the deal, right? What's gonna happen? Are they gonna do like let's say on, you know, some weird Doctor Who alternate universe, both the FTC and the EC basically go, nope, can't do this deal. It violates anti-monopoly. From balls to bone, I know that Sony will absolutely try and then acquire Activision. And so it's one of those things where I'm like, I honestly don't see how they're going to prevent this. And I don't know what kind of resolution they could offer if they did, because the more money you make, the better lawyers you're going to have. Like, I'm shocked Microsoft hasn't hired me as one of their litigating lawyers. Like, I'm the fucking best in the world. So I don't understand it. I don't really know what's going on, but I thought I would do a quick video on this. And yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm really interested to see how this goes out, but I think it's going to go out more with kind of a thud than like this knockdown, drag out war, basically. So I don't know. We'll see. Let me know what you think in the comments below.